Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer, which we've designed specifically to be your ultimate, highly structured CISSP exam blueprint. Today, we're locking in on those absolutely critical areas that bridge Domain 1 and Domain 7. If you're gearing up to certify, you already know that figuring out how to navigate the messy aftermath of a security incident is honestly just as vital as preventing one in the first place. So, we're going to break down exactly how you need to think about incident inquiries, evidence handling, and those foundational ethical codes that govern our entire profession.
Here's your mental roadmap for today's session. We'll kick things off with types of investigations, move right into the rules of evidence, break down digital forensic procedures, examine computer crime categories, and wrap it all up with professional ethics codes.
Section 1. Types of investigations.
As a security professional, it is 100% certain that you'll eventually encounter a security incident that requires a formal inquiry. And the context of that inquiry changes literally everything about how you proceed. So first up, you've got to understand the legal thresholds that separate different types of investigations. Take a criminal investigation, which is typically run by law enforcement. The burden of proof there is incredibly strict. You have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning you're presenting facts where no other logical conclusion could possibly exist. But if you're dealing with a civil investigation, say a dispute between two private parties without the police involved, that standard is way weaker. We call this a preponderance of the evidence. That just means your evidence has to show the outcome is more likely than not.
Okay, time for a CISSP exam mindset note. Pay really close attention to this one, guys. Do not confuse operational investigations with administrative ones. Operational investigations, that's just your standard technical troubleshooting, like trying to figure out why on earth the web server is lagging. They have the absolute loosest standards for collecting info because your primary goal is just fixing the problem, right? It is not meant to hold up in court. Administrative investigations, on the other hand, deal with internal policy violations or HR issues, and those might require a much stronger standard of evidence collection.
Now, what's really interesting here is the Electronic Discovery Reference Model, or eDiscovery. It basically formalizes the total chaos of data collection during litigation. When legal action strikes, you have a duty to preserve and share information, and it follows a really strict logical sequence. You start with preservation, making sure data isn't altered or deleted. Then, collection gathers it all into a central spot. Next, processing does a rough cut, basically filtering out all the irrelevant junk data. Then comes review, where you determine what is actually relevant and make sure to protect things like attorney-client privilege. Finally, production formats that data so it can actually be shared with opposing counsel. It is a highly coordinated dance between IT and a legal team.
Section 2. The rules of evidence.
Once we've collected all that data, we have to know if it can actually be used in open court. A judge has to determine if it's admissible, meaning it's relevant, material, and legally obtained, which is altogether known as being competent. Now, for the exam, you absolutely must memorize these 4 distinct categories of evidence. First, real or object evidence. These are actual, tangible, physical items brought right into the courtroom, like a seized hard drive or a keyboard covered in fingerprints. Second, documentary evidence. These are written items that prove a fact and they absolutely must be authenticated. Think of your computer logs here. Third is testimonial evidence, which is exactly what it sounds like, statements from witnesses under oath. And finally, demonstrative evidence. These are items that support testimony but might not be evidence all on their own, like a diagram showing exactly how a distributed denial of service attack took down the network.
Let's lock in another critical CISSP exam mindset note. When you're dealing with documentary evidence, the exam loves to test 2 specific traps. First, the best evidence rule. This states that you must use the original document in court, not a copy, unless some very specific exceptions apply. Second is the parole evidence rule. This one dictates that once an agreement is actually put into a written contract, no previous verbal agreements can modify that written document. You need to know those 2 definitions cold.
And building right on top of that, here is another exam mindset note, this time regarding the hearsay rule. Usually, hearsay is completely inadmissible. You can't testify about what your buddy told you outside of court. But what about computer logs? Are they hearsay? Well, technically, yes. However, they bypass the hearsay rule through a loophole called the business records exception. If your logs are collected routinely, automatically, and just as part of regular daily business activity, they become admissible. But, and this is a big but, if you only turn on logging after an attack happens, you're probably going to lose that exception.
Moving on to Section 3, digital forensic procedures. So how do we correctly gather these logs and hard drives without totally ruining our case? The golden rule, straight from the International Organization on Computer Evidence, is that actions you take should never, ever change the original evidence. So the crucial point for media analysis is this exact sequence. You literally never analyze a live system's hard drive directly. Step 1, you power off the system. Step 2, remove the drive and attach it to a forensic workstation using a write blocker. That's a physical piece of hardware that stops any data from being written back to the device. Step 3, calculate a cryptographic hash of the original contents. Step 4, create a bitwise forensic image, an exact copy. Step 5, hash the image and compare it to your original hash to prove absolutely nothing changed. From there, you only analyze the copy, which preserves your chain of custody.
Now that's for physical media. But network analysis, that's an entirely different beast because network data is highly volatile. If it isn't recorded exactly when it happens, it's just gone forever. Poof. Therefore, as an analyst, you have to rely entirely on pre-existing security controls. You'll be digging into intrusion detection and prevention logs, network flow data, deliberate packet captures using span ports or hardware taps, and of course, firewall logs. Your job is basically correlating these totally disparate sources to paint a cohesive picture of the attack.
Let's pause for another crucial exam mindset note about legal confiscation. If you need a piece of hardware, how do you legally get your hands on it? Voluntary surrender is the easiest, and it's often baked right into an employee's contract. Subpoenas compel someone to hand it over, but they give the attacker time to potentially destroy data. A search warrant, which is heavily tied to the Fourth Amendment, requires demonstrating probable cause to a judge and is used to surprise a suspect so they can't hide anything. Finally, you have exigent circumstances. These allow law enforcement to seize evidence without a warrant if there's an immediate risk of the evidence being destroyed or if people's lives are actually in danger.
Section 4. Computer crime categories.
Let's shift our narrative from the how of investigations to the who and why, because understanding an attacker's goal really helps clarify the techniques they're going to use and the evidence they'll leave behind. Motivation dictates everything. Military and intelligence attacks are highly sophisticated, they want to steal secret info, and they leave almost no trace. Business attacks are all about corporate espionage and IP theft. Financial attacks are exactly what they sound like, unlawfully obtaining money. Terrorist attacks aim for pure disruption and instilling fear, often targeting critical infrastructure. Thrill attacks, those are usually your script kiddies using downloaded tools just for bragging rights. But the one you've got to watch the most carefully is the grudge attack, which is motivated by pure, unadulterated resentment.
To really highlight that grudge attack, let's talk about the insider threat. The source text shares a wild real-world story of a company that suffered thousands of dollars in theft and data destruction. The culprit? A recently fired system administrator. Quote, he left the building with a chip on his shoulder and an axe to grind. The company had an immature deprovisioning process. This is a huge exam mindset note. Failing to terminate access the exact second an employee is fired is a massive failure of due diligence. Disgruntled insiders already know your architecture inside and out. They are incredibly dangerous if you leave those accounts active.
Which brings us to Section 5, Professional Ethics Codes.
This leads us to the final and, honestly, perhaps the most critical component of the CISSP blueprint. All this technical knowledge means absolutely nothing without the rules of personal behavior guiding how we actually use it. As security professionals, we are entrusted with profound authority. We act as a beacon of public trust. We have access to the most sensitive systems, data, and investigations out there. And because we occupy this position of immense trust, we have to hold ourselves to an incredibly strict standard to ensure that power is never abused. Ethics aren't just polite suggestions. They are the literal foundation of our entire profession.
And this brilliantly illustrates the 4 mandatory ISC2 canons that dictate exactly what those ethical standards are. Now, these are in order of priority, which is super important. Canon 1 protects society, the common good, and the infrastructure. Public safety always comes first. Canon 2, act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. This is all about your personal integrity. Canon 3, provide diligent and competent service to principals, meaning your employer or your clients, but only after society and legality are satisfied. Canon 4, advance and protect the profession, which means keeping your own skills sharp and mentoring others. You absolutely must memorize these 4.
Here is your final CISSP exam mindset note for this explainer. While the ISC2 canons tell you what you should do, RFC 1087, which was drafted by the Internet Architecture Board, outlines what you absolutely should not do. It sets the negative bounds of ethical internet use. Under RFC 1087, it is considered completely unethical to gain unauthorized access, disrupt intended use, waste resources, destroy integrity, or compromise user privacy. Think of it as the definitive list of thou shalt nots for cyberspace.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer and to a final, pretty heavy question you really need to ask yourself before you sit for this exam.
Do you simply know the definitions of evidence and investigations, or are you truly prepared to bear the burden of the public trust? Because passing the CISSP isn't just a test of technical mastery, it is a serious commitment to being an ethical guardian of the systems that our society relies on every single day. Study the rules, memorize the standards, but above all else, embrace that responsibility. Good luck out there, and keep learning.